Safari parks are a place of refuge from the hustle and bustle of modern life, where one can reconnect with nature and experience the wonder of the great outdoors. The safeguarding of national parks thrives only through the devoted efforts of park rangers, who are their caretakers. However, in their noble endeavors, these park rangers often find themselves amidst captivating encounters with diverse wildlife. But unfortunately, encounters with formidable creatures like bears sometimes pose unforeseen challenges. Kiyomi Sato was a park ranger at the Gunma Safari Park, located northwest of Tokyo in Japan. The park offers a safari zone where visitors can drive freely around the park or in designated buses to view and feed animals in their natural habitats. It houses over 100 species of different animals that roam freely in the extensive 360,000 square meter grounds. The enchanting oasis beckons visitors with promises of untamed beauty and the opportunity to witness wildlife in its purest form as it unfolds just beyond a single pane of window glass. However, on the ill-fated day of Tuesday, the 16th of August, 2016, the park would bear witness to a sequence of events that defied the harmony it was renowned for. It was a day like any other, with the radiant sun casting its golden hues upon the tranquil scenery and the gentle rustling of leaves embracing the air. Within the park's borders, 46-year-old Kiyomi Sato got into her vehicle and embarked on her routine patrol, unaware of the invisible threads of destiny that were about to be woven. The car was her trusted companion and her gateway to the uncharted territories within the realm of wild predators. With practiced grace, she navigated the winding roads of the park, her eyes keenly scanning each corner, every patch of lush greenery where curious creatures might lay in wait. The melodies of chirping birds and rustling leaves provided a soundtrack to her journey. A gentle breeze swept through the open windows, carrying with it the subtle sense of grass and adventure as the unmistakable silhouette of majestic giraffes emerged from the verdant landscape. The giraffes gracefully glided across the savanna with their elongated necks stretched towards the heavens, and their patterned hides blending harmoniously with the golden hues of the surrounding flora. Kiyomi eased her foot off the gas pedal, bringing the car to a gentle halt. With her hands resting on the steering wheel, she surrendered to the captivating scenery that was unfolding before her eyes. Time seemed to stand still as she embraced this precious moment of connection with the natural world. Unfortunately, it was amidst this beauty that disaster struck. An Asian black bear, which had been silently observing her parked car, launched its unsuspected assault. Driven by an unyielding hunger for life, the bear stood on its hind legs, reached out with its paws, and delicately grasped the safety bar on the passenger window of the car and began pulling. The bear's raw strength manifested in every tendon as it pulled the safety bar with purpose. The metal groaned under the force as the safety bar swiftly relinquished their grip and yielded to the bear's unwavering will. The safety bars, meant to ensure the safety of those inside the vehicle, had now been ripped off the frame of the car's window, exposing the park ranger to vulnerability. Kiyomi, who was stunned and frozen in fear, turned just as the bear had climbed into the passenger seat. Her senses were enveloped in a whirlwind of panic. Her heart pounded through her veins. Her eyes, wide with terror, desperately sought solace in the face of imminent peril. She found herself at the mercy of this unexpected intruder and had neither the time to get out of the vehicle and run as the hungry beast began its assault. Her fate was sealed. The safe haven of the vehicle, meant to shield her from harm, was now an arena of terror as the bear unleashed its aggression upon its human prey. In a blur of fur and fangs, Kiyomi found herself ensnared within the bear's grip. Pain seared through every fiber of her being as the bear's fangs tore through the flesh on her left breast and stomach. The world around her faded into a haze of fear, desperation, and confusion. The baffling sight drew gasps of astonishment and concern from nearby park visitors who were unaware of the horrors unfolding inside the confined space of the car. The car shook violently as the bear forcefully maneuvered its jaws, trying to tear the flesh from the bone. Fur and blood danced through the air, adding horror to the inconceivable sight. Swiftly recognizing the severity of the situation, fellow park staff rushed to Kiyomi's aid and shot the menacing beast before it could inflict further damage. They provided immediate medical attention while frantically summoning the necessary emergency services. Kiyomi's life now hung by a thread as she was urgently transported to the nearest hospital, where medical professionals tirelessly battled to save her. Unfortunately, the news that would send shockwaves throughout the park and the wider community soon arrived. A life had been extinguished prematurely, leaving an indelible void in the hearts of all who knew and loved Kiyomi Sato. In the wake of this devastating incident, authorities sought to decipher the sequence of events that led to this tragic encounter. It was discovered that Kiyomi had taken her routine patrol with the passenger's window rolled down. Typically, even though there are safety bars across the middle of each window, they should stay up unless the ranger is feeding the animals. The safety bars are designed to allow only the mouth of a bear to pass. However, this particular bear had successfully managed to tear out the safety bar, and with the window rolled down, the beast had seized its opportunity, laying claim to a life lost in the pursuit of duty. The authorities also questioned the strength of the 2-centimeter in diameter safety bars on the vehicle's windows, and why there was only one safety bar put in place instead of the recommended 2. But the park officials stated that the decision to use one bar was a point of compromise between safety and convenience. Eventually, 2 safety bars were installed on each window, since it was now clear that one was not enough for protection. Although the use of wire mesh as an additional safety feature was discussed, it was later discarded, as it would not allow the park workers to feed the animals through the window and would also make visibility poor. As the community mourned the loss of a cherished member, they also found solace in the shared memories and experiences that Kiyomi Sato had gifted them during her time at the park. Her unwavering dedication and her passion for the well-being of the animals she cared for will be remembered by everyone who knew and worked with her. A renewed commitment to education and awareness regarding wildlife conservation also took root, driven by the desire to honor Kiyomi's memory and prevent further loss of life. The Asian black bear was identified as a 5-year-old male, weighing a staggering 160 kilograms. Kiyomi's deadly encounter was the second animal attack in Gunma Safari Park since 1997. When a tiger killed a couple after they misguidedly exited their vehicle in the tiger enclosure. Now, with 2 human fatalities under the park's watch, visitors are always thinking if they will be the next to meet their terrifying final affliction. Lance Crosby had worked and lived in Yellowstone National Park for 5 seasons. His job was with MedCorps, which is a company that operates 3 emergency care clinics in the park. They provide medical assistance to visitors and staff within the park. The facilities include the ability to provide stabilization of major trauma or other life-threatening injuries prior to being diverted to advanced care facilities elsewhere. Working in such an environment was exciting, and you never knew what you'd be dealing with each day. Lance had worked as a seasonal employee at the Lake Medical Clinic during the summer months. As well as being medically trained, he had a keen interest in bears, and during his downtime at work, he enjoyed hiking and exploring the wilderness Yellowstone had on offer. On August 7, 2015, Lance headed out to his favorite spot, Elephant Back Mountain Trail. Located near Lake Village, the trek can take between 2 and 3 hours and loops through dense lodgepole forest. As it climbs to a peak, it offers spectacular views of Yellowstone Lake, something 63-year-old Lance always enjoyed. But on that fateful day, Lance broke some of the park's cardinal rules. He was hiking alone, and he didn't carry any bear spray with him. On top of that, he wasn't carrying a mobile phone in case of emergencies. He had often stated that he preferred not to carry bear spray as a deterrent because it would make him complacent. Instead, he always remained vigilant, relying on his senses and knowledge of the area to protect himself against surprise bear encounters. Unfortunately, this tactic didn't work for him, and it is uncertain whether carrying bear spray during his final hike would have helped anyway. because his encounter turned out to be a rare and unusual attack. As he walked up the winding path, a pair of eyes were trained on him. It was a female grizzly with her 2 yearling cubs. She was on the hunt and considered the lone hiker to be prey. Lance was unaware that he was being stalked. Hidden behind the tree trunks, the sow moved closer to the trail. Then decided to cut through the trees. Lance stepped off the path and climbed uphill, further from the well-marked route. The female grizzly walked purposefully across the ground, gaining on him. When Lance paused to take a breath, he looked behind him, but the grizzly and her cubs were concealed by the undergrowth. They didn't make a sound. When he continued upwards, she followed silently behind him. Her footsteps didn't make a rustle on the ground. Her cubs trotted dutifully a few paces behind her. When Lance was just a third of a mile from the hiking trail, the grizzly had managed to stalk to within yards of him. She was still unnoticed, still undetected by the seasoned hiker. Suddenly, she lunged forwards and leapt onto Lance from behind. It was a classic predatory attack. Lance was floored immediately. The sow weighed 259 pounds, 117 kilograms. Her weight alone was enough to subdue Lance, but he tried to fight back. He could hear the guttural growling of the grizzly on top of him. He tried to push her away, but she swiped him with her large paws, her long claws slashing his forearms. Then came the fatal delivery. Within seconds, she clamped her jaws around the back of his neck and crushed his spinal column. The bear lifted him up off his feet and shook him violently, causing catastrophic damage. Lance felt the pressure building from the powerful bite before his spine gave way, and he was killed instantly, still hanging from her mouth. Severing the spinal cord, the bear rapidly disposed of its prey, and the struggle was over. She tucked into his body, devouring meat and calling her cubs over to join in. Lance hadn't been prepared for a predatory attack, but there is very little one can do when they are stalked and hunted by an adult grizzly bear. He hadn't seen her coming. He was unaware of the bear's presence until it had been too late. After feasting on Lance's body, the bear tried to cache his remains. She scooped up the surrounding vegetation, concealing it, with the intent on returning another day to eat. Her cubs had witnessed the attack on the man, and because the cubs learned behavior from their mother, they also now posed a threat to the general public. When Lance didn't show up for work the following morning, his colleagues raised the alarm. They informed the park rangers of his favorite hiking spot, and they went to investigate. With the Elephant Back Mountain Trail being a popular route for visitors to the park, it was surprising he hadn't been found earlier, but he had strayed off the beaten track. One of the rangers found his body, and the park's investigative team and local forensics were called in. From the evidence at the kill site, it appeared that the attack was rapid. There was no long, drawn-out struggle. The bear had not dragged his body through the woodland. Instead, she had delivered the fatal bite and eaten part of him then and there. Evidence showed that the cubs had also fed on him. His ball cap was found just 3 feet from his feet. There were no blood spatter marks, no blood trail, and no clothing fragments or personal possessions found outside of the body burial cache. This suggested that Lance was killed where his body lay. Defensive marks on his arms suggested that he fought back, but his cause of death was blunt force trauma. The coroner reported fractured bones in his back, which revealed that the grizzly grabbed him and shook him violently, causing brainstem disruption and immediate cessation of cardiac activity. Paw prints led investigators to the female grizzly responsible for the attack. She and her 2 cubs were standing nearby. The decision was made to euthanize her. The incident had not been a defensive one. Sometimes bears will attack people if they feel threatened or they believe their cubs are in danger. But this attack was clearly a predatory one and meant that the bear viewed people as food. This was a very dangerous situation, and rangers couldn't ensure public safety whilst she remained in the park. A necropsy was performed on the bear. Bite marks on Lance's body matched her mouth and teeth. DNA analysis of her fur also matched some found in close proximity to the kill site. She was in reasonable health, with average body fat reserves on her. She was not starving or desperate for food. As for her cubs, the rangers couldn't allow them to remain in the park. Not only were they too young to fend for themselves, weighing just 50 pounds, 20 kilograms, but they would likely have learnt their mother's predatory behavior. Instead, park officials decided to move them to Toledo Zoo. Being as young as they were more likely to adapt to a life in captivity than older bears. Rangers took into consideration the nature of the attack and the condition of the bears when they decided the fate of the family. They tried to balance the protection of the wildlife with that of human visitors. A survey conducted on 7,770 day hikers to Yellowstone revealed that 60% of hiking groups were smaller than the recommended number of at least 3. It also found that fewer than 14% carried bear spray. These are just 2 basic precautions that are recommended by park officials, and yet most people don't adhere to them. The previous year, in 2014, there were estimated to be between 674 and 839 bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Since the national park was established in 1872, there have been 8 fatalities by bears. Far more people have died from drowning at the park, a total of 125, and 23 from burns after falling into the hot springs. On average, 3 million people visit Yellowstone every year. Despite this, the chances of being injured by a grizzly bear are approximately 1 in 2.7 million visits, and are similar odds to being struck by a falling tree. Still, if precautions are taken and an awareness of the dangers is known beforehand, then a visit to Yellowstone National Park is likely to be an enjoyable one that doesn't lead to your terrifying final affliction. Under the starlit sky of Quebec near Ottawa, the rural Highway 148 was usually a peaceful road, but on this fateful night, it was about to witness a scene of horror. As 2 vehicles approached each other, the stillness of the night was disrupted by a tragic and bizarre event. A Pontiac Sunfire driven by 2 unnamed men, ages 19 and 23, were driving down the road when a young 300-pound black bear suddenly appeared out of nowhere and walked in front of the car. The driver tried to swerve and avoid the bear, but it was too late. The Pontiac Sunfire's aerodynamic design, which was lower to the ground, propelled the bear into the air and into the path of an oncoming Nissan Pathfinder like a speeding bullet. The driver of the Pontiac Sunfire swerved off the road on impact with the bear, crashing into the ditch. But the 2 young men were unharmed in the crash. Leading up to the crash, as the Nissan Pathfinder made its way down Highway 148, the occupants of the vehicle, a young couple and their friend, were having a leisurely drive, chatting and enjoying the clear night sky. But as they approached the Pontiac Sunfire, heading in the opposite direction, they heard a loud crash before a massive black bear came hurtling towards them, as if from nowhere. They hardly had time to process what was happening before the 300-pound bear came crashing through the windshield of their SUV. The bear's momentum was so strong that it smashed through the front windshield and out the back window, totaling the vehicle and leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. The woman's boyfriend, seated in the front passenger seat of the SUV, was in a state of shock as he gazed at the aftermath of the bear's collision with the vehicle. His world was shattered as he opened his eyes to the sight of his girlfriend, a 25-year-old woman from Ottawa, slumped over and lifeless in the driver's seat. The once vibrant and beautiful woman he loved was now gone, taken from him in an instant. He felt a rush of sadness and anger wash over him as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. But as he turned his gaze to the back seat, he was hit with another devastating blow. His friend, a 40-year-old man, entangled in a mass of twisted metal, also lifeless. The bear's incredible force had claimed 2 lives in a matter of seconds, leaving him as the only survivor. He felt a deep sense of emptiness and loss as he looked at the 2 people he cared about, now gone forever. The reality of the situation hit him like a freight train, leaving him in a state of shock and disbelief. The memories of laughter and good times shared with his girlfriend and friend played through his mind like a movie reel, reminding him of the love and joy they had brought into his life. While it's common for drivers in rural Canada to encounter deer and moose on roads, it's a rare occurrence for bears to wander onto a highway. It was later revealed that it was bear mating season, and a local hunting guide warned drivers to be extra cautious as male bears roam outside their territory in search of female bears in heat. The victims' names were not released, but their families and friends were left with an emptiness that can never be filled. A young woman's life was cut short, and a man lost his life in the most freakish of circumstances. Even the 300-pound flying bear met his unfortunate final affliction. There are thousands of polar bears in Alaska, but despite this, attacks on humans are incredibly rare. Polar bears are apex predators, hunting seals, young walruses, and even sometimes beluga whales and narwhals. But occasionally they stumble into local communities on the search for food. In the small village of Wales, located on the Seward Peninsula on the western coast of Alaska, tragedy struck in January 2023. The close-knit community of about 150 people were going about their daily lives. The village, the westernmost on North America's mainland, overlooks the Bering Strait. The small settlement is rich in its cultural heritage. It is one of the most isolated settlements in America, a frozen landscape, a tundra of ice and snow. The weather had been terrible for the past few days. Strong winds whipped up ground-lying snow, creating whiteout conditions. The people of Wales were used to this. It was common for supplies to dwindle before planes flew in to restock. Once the entire community ran out of toilet paper, they didn't see a plane or helicopter for 6 weeks. That was part of the life here. The harsh conditions, but also the magical beauty of the landscape, relatively untouched by man, a wilderness that beckons adventure and the exploration of the great outdoors. Summer Myomick, a 24-year-old mother and popular member of the community, was braving the elements. She was walking with her 1-year-old son, Clyde Angtawasruk. It was January 17th, 2:30 in the afternoon. The pair were walking between the small school and medical clinic. There was nothing unusual about the day. The route Summer took was routine and unremarkable, but camouflaged against the backdrop of white was a predator, an apex predator that was top of the food chain. It was looking for a meal. It stalked towards the village, its paws, 12 inches, 30 centimeters across, and bearing 2-inch claws, trod firmly on the ground. Its lumbering gait was hidden from view by the poor visibility. It was making its way closer to the village. With every step, it was closer to its kill. It was a large polar bear. It stopped momentarily, raised its head, and sniffed the air. Its keen sense of smell had drawn it towards the village. Perhaps the scent of garbage had wafted on the air. Perhaps the smell of food or humans had enticed it inland. Able to detect a seal 1 mile away and hidden under 3 feet of snow, polar bears have an acute sense of smell. They are almost impossible to hide from outside in the elements. Sprinting at up to 25 miles per hour, you can't outrun them. Standing up to 3 meters on their hind legs, you can't fight them off. They are a formidable predator. Summer was just yards from Wales' Kingikmuit school gates when she heard a commotion. The bear had entered the village. Screams rang out as terrified locals made a dash for cover. A house, a shop, a car. Unbeknown to Summer, the polar bear was on a rampage. It chased people as it thundered through the streets. It was hungry. It was on the prowl. When it spotted an easy meal, it made a run for it, its huge, powerful body racing towards unsuspecting residents. But for Summer, who was just passing by the school, she had nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, and the polar bear spotted her outside the school gates. It ran at her, slowly at first, and then gaining speed. Its eyes were fixed on the young mother and her baby. Fearless and powerful, it came in for the kill. In a moment of panic, a moment of sheer terror, children inside the school grounds began screaming. They could see the menacing bear coming in for the attack. It leapt onto Summer, knocking her to the ground. There was nothing she could have done. There was nothing young Clyde could have done. The pair were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were no match for a 1,500-pound, 700-kilogram bear. Teachers from the school came running outside. They had heard the commotion. They could hear the screams from their terrified pupils and the cries from Summer and her boy. As the polar bear launched its attack, the teachers grabbed the children and rushed them inside. But the bear spotted them. It had made a kill and now it wanted more. It ran at the school doors, trying to force its way inside. The head teacher, Dawn Hendrickson, slammed the school door shut, bolting it from the inside. The polar bear's powerful front paws rapped on the door. Would the door hold its weight, or would it buckle, allowing the bear to enter and wreak havoc amongst staff and students there? They all held their breath, not daring to move, not daring to utter a sound. The young children's faces were a picture of terror, their eyes wide open, their hearts in their mouths, as their teachers tried their best to keep them quiet. Staff locked the school down. They remained silent, listening, waiting, hoping upon hope that the door would hold out, that the bear would leave them alone. They drew the blinds on the windows. The bear couldn't see in. The people couldn't see out. They managed to get word to the community that there was a bear on the loose. A short while later, staff and students heard the crack of a loud gunshot from outside. Peering through the window blinds, they could see the polar bear. It lay slumped on the ground outside the school gates. It lay motionless, still. It was dead. The weather had been so bad that Wales had been inaccessible. Strong winds and blizzards had caused whiteout conditions. Lights on the gravel runway were undetectable. When weather is good, up to 6 small planes land on the gravel each day. But this lifeline to the outside world is tenuous. It is often cut when weather is bad. This time, help was a day away. State troopers arrived at the scene the next day. The attack on Summer was a haunting reminder of how fragile life is. She and her young son had their lives ripped away from them in a terrible way. Until then, locals had lived without fear from attack for more than 30 years. Despite being on the fringes of the Arctic Circle, polar bear sightings within the village are rare, and attacks even more so. The district's chief school administrator, Susan Nedza, described the community as dealing with crippling grief. Summer was a much-liked young lady. She was sweet and kind, a devoted mother. The school was closed to the lessons for the rest of the week, but it was left open as a refuge for those who tried to come to terms with what happened on its doorstep. The school provided meals and counseling for those in need, people coming together at a time of grief. Jeff York, Senior Director of Conservation at Polar Bears International, was shocked and surprised by the attack. When asked to comment on the bear's behavior, he stated that the bear must have been desperate for it to have chased multiple people. It wasn't an opportunistic attack. It was in the village to make a kill, and it would stop at nothing until it had done so. Although immediately north and south of Wales, there is now water at that time of year instead of ice due to a warming climate, there is still plenty of ice close by for the bears to hunt on. It's very unusual for a polar bear to leave its typical hunting ground to search elsewhere. It doesn't make sense. But with less sea ice encouraging polar bears to hunt ashore and more human activity in the Arctic, attacks are on the rise. Community members in Wales developed a polar bear patrol program to keep its residents safe. Unfortunately, this was discontinued due to a lack of funding, a decision that had resulted in a mother and her 1-year-old son meeting their unfortunate final affliction. The Run Amok Campground near Hyder, Alaska is a very popular viewing place for bears and has been for many years. By the year 2000, the townspeople of Hyde had long since gotten used to the slew of tourists coming in to catch a glimpse of the majestic grizzly and brown bears. And surprisingly, most of the people coming through aren't tourists. They're their own people. City slickers who wanted to get a taste of nature, but from a safe, vantage point. The campgrounds around Hyder have many viewing posts, built several meters above the ground with bridge lookouts that have heavy gates at either end. These seemingly simple safety measures are actually very effective, and it's the reason that the area only had 3 attacks from bears since the 60s. Those unlucky individuals were usually foolish city folk who thought for some inexplicable reason that it was safe to walk up to a wild bear to pet it, and one unfortunate hunter who just happened to stumble upon a mother bear and her cub. But for the most part, Hyder is one of the best and safest places to visit, despite the many, many bears that call the surrounding woods home. In the weeks leading up to July 18, 2000, Hyder experienced a rather unruly new inhabitant, a 300-pound brown bear that made it its business to terrorize the town. The permanent inhabitants weren't unfamiliar with the occasional bear wandering into town, and in the past, they simply kept out of the animal's way for a few days until it decided on its own that the woods were much more peaceful than a place with cars and noisy sawmills that were the main source of income for the 140 residents. But this bear wasn't so easily deterred. Determined to get its hands on every garbage can and scrap of food it could reach, it made quite a nuisance of itself and caused a fair bit of damage during its searches for food. After a week of hoping that the animal would finally give up and leave its nightly ventures into town behind it, hunters were finally deployed to locate the bear when it nearly attacked an employee of one of the sawmills one evening. The woman stepped out of her house to take out the trash and walked straight into the animal rummaging through their trash can. Luckily, her front door was just feet away, and she managed to make it inside unharmed. The very next night, it again tried to attack another resident who had let his dog out. This man was chased from his front yard back into his cabin, where he was forced to shut the door before his dog could make it inside too. Whether or not the bear killed the dog is unknown, but the mutt was never seen again. But the trackers were having a difficult time finding the animal. Those woods are full of bears, and distinguishing it from the rest wasn't going to be an easy task. All they could do was wait until it made an appearance in town again and hope that someone isn't killed. George Toulouse was in Hyder for the summer, working part-time at the sawmill. Since the 41-year-old was only staying for a few months, he'd set up a tent at Camp Runamuck. He and the other seasonal workers knew each other well, since the other 5 men living at the camp all worked in Hyder every summer too. Their days were long and hard, and by the time the evening came around there were no rowdy parties or late nights. They all took their turns at the campground's facilities to wash up and headed off to bed, just to start the next day all over again. Friday night was a night like every other. George got back, dusty, tired, and wanting nothing more than a shower and a warm meal. After his turn at the shower, he cooked his food in front of his tent and crawled into his warm bed less than 2 hours after he got off work. In his haste to get to sleep, George left his dishes right next to the dwindling coals, with plans to clean up in the morning before he went to work. It was those tasty-smelling dishes that drew the hungry animals straight into his camp. Near the morning hours, long after the fire had burned out, George heard the rummage and shuffle outside his tent. Furious and expecting to find someone stealing his things, George wasted no time to rip open the tent's zipper and storm out into the night, ready to let fists fly to protect his possessions. Whatever George expected, it certainly wasn't a 300-pound brown bear, with George's dinner plate held to its face, licking off the flecks of ketchup left over from dinner. The bear was so startled that it dropped the plastic plate in shock, just as George stumbled backwards, falling back into his tent, hitting the ground hard. George flipped over on his stomach and attempted to stand up, but then his feet, which were still outside the tent's flap, were grabbed, and he was ripped out so fast that he had no time to react. He flew through the air and hit the ground again, landing a full 9 yards away in the dirt. George only managed to utter a single cry before the snarling beast pounced on top of him, landing with such force on his chest that had shattered his sternum and most of his ribs, sending shards of bone into his lungs. With his entire chest crushed to the point that nothing but blood and fluid was rushing into them, George couldn't yell for help. He couldn't scream in pain as the monstrosity above him began to tear and slash at his face. George was thrown around like a rag doll, limply going where the bear was throwing him. With no oxygen to fuel his lungs, George could not fight back. He was utterly defenseless. In the few minutes it took for George to succumb to the incredible abuse his body was being put through, one of the other campers woke briefly, hearing the grunting of what was obviously a very large animal. The man lay awake for a few seconds, listening to what he thought was a bear rooting through someone's trash. It wouldn't be the first time that one of the beasts lumbered into camp searching for food, and if no one was making a ruckus, it was understood that it was best to leave the animal alone, and it would head back to the trees before the morning came. And since George was unable to make any sound to alert the other people, the man just rolled over and went back to sleep. He was 60 yards away from George's camp, and what he could hear was far enough in the distance that it didn't worry him all that much. What finally killed George is uncertain. It could have been his shattered chest, the claws that raked across his throat, or his shattered skull as the animal slammed him into the hard ground over and over again. Maybe it was blood loss and shock, or a combination of all of those things. But what is certain is that his death came in less than 3 minutes after he was pulled from his tent. The next morning, the man who'd heard the sounds that night walked past George's camp, hoping to share a cup of coffee with his colleague. He saw the blood in the open tent flap and immediately raised the alarm. The 5 workers set out to look for George, and they found him laying by the tree line of the forest 12 yards behind his tent. His body, or what was left of it, was an absolute mess. The bear had begun to eat at George, but apparently decided that it was too much effort to carry him away to a hiding spot to finish off later, like bears usually do. The news spread along the radio, and rangers were called in from the neighboring towns. But before they could even make it to Hyder, the bear was spotted at a nearby sawmill's dump site. The workers who saw it knew from one look that it was the very animal that had killed George. Its muzzle was still caked in blood, and there were bits of George's flesh stuck in its fur. The workers picked up their rifles and shot at it as it was upending a trash can. They weren't going to wait for the rangers. It had evaded capture, traps, and trackers for nearly 2 weeks. If they didn't take their chance now, then it would just get away again. Only after it lay dead on the ground did they call it in, and the rangers' only job was to transport it to the coroner's, where it lay in the same room as its victim while the necropsy was delivered. And as expected, the proof was in the bear's stomach. All of the pieces that were missing from George were retrieved from its digestive tract and returned to its owner. George was the 4th and last person around Hyder to meet their terrifying final affliction. On October 25, 2005, 34-year-old Tomohiro Tamura headed to work. He was a zookeeper at Fuji Safari Park in the Natural Zoological Park in Tsuyama, Suzano City. The park is one of the largest and most popular in Japan and is situated on the southern slopes of Mount Fuji. It offers a fully immersive experience for visitors who can either walk along a 2.5-kilometer nature trail around the perimeter of the safari section or drive right through the middle of it. The park is so large that it can take up to an hour to drive through the winding tracks. Inside the large paddocks are free-roaming animals, including lions, tigers, giraffes, cheetahs, elephants, rhinos, and bears. If guests take a guided tour, then they can feed the large carnivores through the metal bars on the buses as they inch their way through the enclosures. It's certainly an up-close and personal experience for the paying public. Tomohiro was a seasoned zookeeper who had been in the business for 16 years. He was no stranger to hard work and the challenges of animal husbandry. He was familiar with a wide variety of wild and endangered animals. Safety was one of his responsibilities, and he followed the protocols in place meticulously. Before 9 a.m. that morning, Tomohiro had the task of moving 2 of the brown bears from one section of the enclosure to another. He was paired with another zookeeper, 19-year-old Takao Koizumi, who was relatively new to the job. The details of the task at hand that day aren't completely clear, but it seems that the 2 keepers had to move 2 brown bears from the breeding shed into the large enclosure where visitors can drive through and see them from the safety of their vehicles. Some reports suggested that Tomohiro would drive at the bears, effectively chasing them into the enclosure with his vehicle, whilst other reports suggest he was aiming to secure the bears in cages before transporting them. Either way, tragedy struck during the task. The following is what seems to have happened. The park was opening soon, and all the animals had to be on display for the paying public. Moving the bears was a standard maneuver that the 2 of them had performed countless times before. They planned to secure the bears in their cages and drive them towards the paddock. Once there, they would open the gates and drive through, securing the gates behind them. Then their plan was for Takao to open the doors to the cages from a safe distance. When the bears emerged, then Tomohiro would drive the 4x4 towards the bears and run towards the edge of the enclosure. Near some shrubbery the bears enjoyed rummaging around in. They would then be able to drive out of the enclosure without the animals following them, and the bears would be secured in the paddock in time for visitors to drive through during the day. But things didn't go to plan. When Takao opened the door to the breeding shed, he waited for the bears to appear. Slowly, they stepped forward. They sniffed the air and took their first steps outside. Takao couldn't see where Tomohiro was. He assumed he was waiting in the vehicle just around the other side of the building. When the bears lumbered outside and onto the grass, Tomohiro was supposed to drive at them and steer them into the cages. But something was wrong. For some reason, Tomohiro wasn't inside the 4x4 as he should have been. Instead, he was outside, and when he turned around, he was now face to face with 2 enormous brown bears, each weighing between 100 and 150 kilograms, 220 to 330 pounds. They immediately walked up to him, excited by this new figure in their enclosure. They knew their keepers, and Tomohiro had been in charge of them for 3.5 years now. But this was their territory. Whether they saw the keeper as a threat in their enclosure or potential prey remains to be seen. But they immediately leapt on top of him, and Tomohiro crashed to the ground. Takao heard screams. He raced around the side of the building and was shocked to see one of the enormous bears on top of his colleague. It had its jaws clamped firmly around Tomohiro's head. He was thrashing around beneath its body, kicking and punching, trying desperately to push the bear off, but the power was overwhelming. It felt as though his skull was going to crack. The pressure was building. The bear was snorting and grunting as it thrashed its head from side to side. Its moist breath covered Tomohiro's face, and he felt blood from his wounds trickling down his cheeks. He knew he was in trouble. He knew he had made a fatal error, but he wasn't giving up. Nobody knows why he stepped outside the vehicle at precisely the wrong moment. Nobody knows what he was thinking at the time, but his friend and colleague witnessed the attack unfolding and instinctively rushed to help. With a bite force of more than 900 psi, brown bears can take down large mammals such as moose and elk, although they typically prey on smaller animals such as salmon, birds, ground squirrels, and marmots. But with the weight behind them and their powerful front paws, they are a force to be reckoned with. In the wild, they are often observed grazing plant life, feeding on a range of berries, herbs, grasses, flowers, nuts, and sedges. When observed from a distance, they can seem docile, but they are incredibly dangerous, whether wild or captive. Whilst Tomohiro was fighting for his life, he was just moments away from becoming a father for the first time. His wife was heading home to deliver her baby, and he should have been there, but he never got the call. It was too late. When the bear released its grip on Tomohiro's head, it hit him with its powerful paws, bashing him from side to side as he held his arms up trying to defend himself. Then he kicked the bear, and it grabbed his leg. It bit through the muscle and into the bone, severing blood vessels. Tomohiro could feel himself growing weak. He was exhausted. The fight was too much, and he was losing blood. He felt the energy draining from his body. His vision became blurred as he looked up at the enormous predator relentlessly biting down on him. He knew his time had come, but there was a glimmer of hope. Takayo radioed through for help before running at the bear to save his colleague. He raised his arms up above his head and shouted, trying to distract it. The other bear watched intently as the attack ensued. Takayo's distraction tactic worked. The bear leapt off Tomohiro and turned its attention to Takayo. It lumbered over to him, its jowls dripping with red, its heavy body pounding across the grass. Takayo knew what was coming. He dropped to the ground and braced for impact. Then it came. The bear jumped on top of him and began another savage attack. Each blow knocked the wind from the young zookeeper's lungs and threatened to knock him unconscious. The 19-year-old was now taking the full brunt of the attack, and it wasn't pleasant. He gritted his teeth together with each blow and every bite into his flesh. He clasped his hands behind his head to try and protect his neck as he curled up in the fetal position. Just when he didn't think he could survive any more blows, mercifully backup arrived, and the bear was chased away by another parked vehicle. Emergency services arrived on scene, and the two keepers were rushed to hospital. Sadly, Tomohiro had lost too much blood and couldn't be revived. But Takayo, despite suffering serious injuries, survived the ordeal. Tomohiro should never have come into contact with the bear. There was no reason for him to have been outside his vehicle, and yet that's exactly what happened. Maybe he thought that his colleague was taking a long time releasing the bears from the shed and was going to go and investigate. His friends and family will never know. He had dedicated his life to animals. It was something he always wanted to do. The work was all he had ever known, but that was little comfort to his wife and their newborn baby. Tragically, only minutes after he died, Tomohiro's wife gave birth to their first baby. It never met its father due to his terrifying final affliction.